think the other issue that you got to tie to this is he ran in 2008 and he didn't have a record. And it was a lot of, well-written speeches on teleprompters.
Yeah.
Now he's got a record he's got to defend. And I think on the economy, every metric, every measure that I see, American people don't have confidence in his policies. Gas prices stay at $4 a gallon and go higher. And you see, 57 consecutive months or thereabouts where, home prices keep going down, inflation now kicking in.
All of those things
these
are going to
things,
be factors.
It becomes a mathematical
I would agree with that,
but
the central theme of what I've been talking about when I travel around the country is the concept of freedom. That we are less free today because of this president. He has systematically convinced people, or shoved it down their throat in the case of health care, that you need more government to take care of you. He doesn't believe in us. Doesn't believe.
He believes in big
America.
government.
He believes
in that.
He said, I think the most telling comment Barack Obama made his entire time as president was just a few weeks ago when he was responding to Paul Ryan's budget. He was talking about Medicare, he was talking about Medicaid and unemployment insurance. And he said this, he said, America is a better country because of these programs. And he went on to say, I'll go one step further. America was not a great country until these programs. The President of the United States said America wasn't a great country until 1965. He doesn't understand America. He doesn't understand who we are. He doesn't understand we were born great. We were a great country because we were the first country in the history of the world that said, we're here to do one thing, and that is to establish a country that allows people to be free so they can provide for themselves, their family, serve their community, be their brother's keeper, and serve the God that they love. That's what America's about.
And coming up, Rick Santorum Unplugged. Now, the gloves come off when he discusses President Obama and how he plans to roll back the administration's most intrusive policies. And then he may be controversial, but former New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson is one of the few candidates who has actually balanced the budget without raising taxes. How did he do it? He'll tell us coming up next. And welcome back to the Hannity primaries. And still to come tonight, former New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson. But first, the final installment of my interview with former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum. How bad is the economy right now? How bad is it?
I think it's in pretty rough shape. I mean, you're seeing housing starting to dip again. Obviously, you have these oil prices. You've got the financial services sector is being crushed, I think, by the Dodd-Frank bill and what's going on there. You have this huge behemoth of a health care bill that is just having a huge overlay on on people thinking about hiring or moving forward with any kind of growth in their business. Then you have the NLRB saying to manufacturers, by the way, if you want to start another company, another business up in another state, don't do it if it's a right-to-work state. You better go overseas. So the president is doing everything he can possibly do with taxes, regulations, beating up on businesses, and an overall environment that is as hostile to business as we've seen since the Great Depression. It's really interesting. You go back and read about Franklin Roosevelt. And Roosevelt had these group of academics, just like Obama, very few people with private sector experiences in his cabinet, had this group of academics, and they just railed on business. They just railed on the rich. And guess what happened? It dragged us further and further into a recession. Why? Because people didn't trust government enough to be able to go out and invest because they didn't think government would let them be profitable.
I think the economy is most akin now to what happened in Japan, the lost decade that never recovered. And they had one stimulus after another, more government program, more spending.
What's the stimulus? I mean, you saw where the stimulus money went. It went to the states. It went to the teachers' unions. I mean, it didn't go to the private sector.
We could have got them for $586,000.
I saw that. Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of interesting things. The most chilling to me is Standard & Poor's. They're going to where our AAA rating is at risk. And then I go to the IMF and they say that in 5 short years, by 2016, that China will surpass America as the #1 economy in the world. That frightens me. And that tells me, you know what, that's not the America that the American exceptionalism that we're capable of.
It's freedom, and we have a president who believes in command and control. He doesn't believe in you. He doesn't believe in freedom. He believes that they should make these decisions and pick winners and losers in the auto industry or in the financial services industry, whatever industry is, that it's not fair unless he has a hand in it. That is not what made America the greatest country in the history of the world. We trusted people. We trusted the opportunities that our country created that would, again, John Kennedy, lifting all
rising tide, lift all boats.
That's right.
What do you think when you look at how the media is covering you You know,
or not covering me.
Or, well, both, okay.
Right.
If you look at the way the media it seems to be scrutinizing every Republican candidate, and then you compare it to 2008, where there were a few of us that got beaten up and excoriated pretty bad for, you know, trying to find out a little bit about an unknown senator from Illinois. You know, what do you think about that process?
Well, it's very clear that that the media has an objective to try to get you know, Republicans to first fight among themselves. I mean, that's the most important thing. You can get people arguing among themselves. But secondly, they're going to go out and pick at everything that's said. They're going to go back, as you saw in Meet the Press. You'll see it everywhere. You know, you said this 20 years ago. Look, what Republicans have to understand is that when you go on a show with members of the media, they're not here to help you. They're here to try to hurt you.
Well, they're playing gotcha.
And they're playing gotcha. And so you've got to stay disciplined and understanding that, you know, I'm going to answer the question as best I can, but I'm not going to accept the premise of your question all the time because it's not necessarily a genuine
it's
premise.
going to be Senator Santorum. Let me roll this tape. Back in 1972, what year were you born?
I was 14 years old.
All right, Senator Santorum, it's great to see you. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Sean.
And still ahead, the Hannity primaries continue with our next candidate, former New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson. He'll defend some of his controversial beliefs, including his take on illegal drugs. That's straight ahead. And welcome back to the special edition of Hannity. Now, we have just heard from former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum. Now it's former New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson's turn to tell us why he is the best person to take on President Obama in 2012. How are you? Good to see you.
I'm great, Sean. Thanks for having me.
So you're running for president?
I'm running for president, running for the Republican nomination for president.
Well, you have the stamina. You're a, triathlete, right? Or
right, endurance athlete.
An endurance athlete. I run 3 miles. I'm like, you know, an hour on the tennis court. I'm ready to pass out. You're going to need it for this battle.
No, you know, and I've been at this now for 16 months with Our America initiative. So been out on the road talking to people, and I wouldn't be here if I didn't think I could do the job. I wouldn't be here if I didn't think I could do a good job. And you got to have a resume to be involved in this too, to get involved in the contest.
One of the things this show wants, we want to give everybody that's running access to people so they can hear you. Right now, I don't think you disagree with me that you are one of the lesser known candidates.
Absolutely.
And a big underdog.
Yeah, yeah.
So what do you do to break through? How do you...
Well, so New Hampshire ends up to be key in this whole equation. The early primary states end up to be key in this. But New Hampshire, I'm going to spend a lot of time in New Hampshire. And New Hampshire, they vet the candidates, and I think they set the stage for the rest of the country.
Now, you have a really excellent track record as governor. I mean,
and I do. I really believe that. I mean,
excuse me.
You got to have a resume to do this.
You got to have a resume. I mean, you balance the budget. You cut a number of thousands of jobs without firing anybody.
You know, not one single penny of tax went up over an 8-year period. Would have reformed Medicaid in New Mexico to save 25% over what we were spending for Medicaid. Built 500 miles of 4-lane highway in the state without raising taxes. You started off by saying 1,200 fewer state employees over an 8-year period. That had never happened before, and I think that was really
through attrition then.
Well, attrition, managing. Not that we didn't try and get rid of dead wood also, but for the most part, it was just managing attrition.
All right. So, I think you run into difficulty, like every candidate has some difficulties. Okay. I think your difficulty is that you're on the more libertarian side of the Republican Party, but you are a Republican. You're not.
Yeah, I am a Republican, and I would argue that perhaps some of these issues are really conservative, and that it is conservative, and that for me, as governor of New Mexico, everything was a cost-benefit analysis. Everything. What are we spending our money on, and what are we getting for the money that we're spending? And included in my tenure as governor, it might be a bit of an embellishment, Sean, but I may have vetoed more legislation than the other 49 governors in the country combined. Mm-hmm. And New Mexico is 2 to 1 Democrat.
The line item veto a bunch of
Thousands of times did I use the line item veto. And given that New Mexico is a state that's 2 to 1 Democrat, I think the fact that I get reelected really speaks volumes to the fact that people appreciate good stewardship of tax dollars, and I'm going to argue that I did that.
There's no doubt that I think for national security reasons and for obvious economic reasons, the defining issue of our time is the economy and the debt and the deficits and out-of-control spending and this power grab in Washington. How do you stop it? Big question, but how?
Hey, I'm under the belief that we're on the verge of a financial collapse, and unless we, and that's in lieu of the fact that we have $14 trillion in debt, and we have no ability to repay $14 trillion in debt if we're racking up $1.6 trillion in deficit spending this year, the year prior, 2 years prior, and the years looking ahead. Look, we're not going to pay back $14 trillion in debt. So what we have to do here is embark on balancing the federal budget tomorrow.
How?
Well, cutting $1.65 trillion from the federal government. You got to start out by talking about Medicaid and Medicare, and I'll just throw out some suggestions here. There are others, but let me just throw out the fact that the federal government could cut Medicaid and Medicare by 43%. They could block grant the states, and I'm going to say this throughout my campaign, 50 laboratories of innovation, the notion of best practices, give it to the states to deliver health care to the poor and those over 65, and do away with the strings, do away with the regulations, the bureaucracy, let the states handle it. There would be best practices emerge. Other states would emulate the best practices. There'd be failure. States would avoid the failure. In New Mexico, Medicaid, now it came with all the strings attached. It came with all the regulation attached. It came with a mandate that here are the services that you had to deliver. But Medicaid in the state of New Mexico, I shifted that from a fee-for-service model to a managed care model and saved 25%. If I were to have been given Medicare, I could have done the same thing with Medicare and saved 25%. And by the way, I used 25%. I could have saved more money. I still could have delivered health care to those truly in need by cutting it 43%. I could have done that. But I was governor of the state. I had a legislature that was 2/3 Democrat. And, you know, I wasn't the benevolent dictator.
Well, what about Social Security? Dean's test, raise the retirement age, or?
Well, a third item would be to change the escalator that's built into Social Security.
Cost of living?
Yes, cost of living increases from the wage index to the inflation rate. That in and of itself would make Social Security solvent. So it's important to point out that it's not cutting Social Security. It's about making it solvent into the future, and that means making it a system that takes in more money than what it pays out.
Well, it's so irritating to me. Had any corporation misappropriated the funds, retirement funds, it was supposed to be put in a lockbox, if we all recall, it was put in the general fund, it was all spent, the CEO, the CFO would all be in jail right now, and of course government, they're not held accountable or to the same standards.
And then talking about monetary policy in this country, the fact that the dollars that we have in our bank accounts today are worth less than they were yesterday, are worth less than they were a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, and that's the fact that we're printing money to cover all these obligations. The Federal Reserve has devalued the dollar significantly.
18.5-month low against the euro.
So from a monetary policy standpoint, abolishing the Federal Reserve would bring about this discipline of spending within our means. Now, I have said that if the Congress were to pass a bill abolishing the Federal Reserve, I would sign on to that legislation. But in the meantime, we went to the moon. We can balance the federal budget, but we need to do that tomorrow. So I don't have a plan for doing this. I don't have a plan for getting a quarter of the way there in 8 years. I have a plan here, or a desire, that we do this in 2013.
And still ahead, we'll have much more with presidential candidate Gary Johnson. Now, the former New Mexico governor talks about his sweeping proposal to cut the size of government in order to avert an economic disaster. That much more as the Hannity primaries continue right here on Fox.